Guys, you can pause the recording.
All right, so this session today is the first of the 6 training sessions that we have for you, especially for Curtin Interschool. This is going to be very, very basic, and this is just for beginners who don't already know the concepts of debating. But I will go a little more in depth with just understanding the formats and the strategies of thinking of motions. At the end of the session, we will likely prep together so that I can also show you guys the way I think of motions and what I'm doing, especially when I'm in a team and trying to just figure out how do we create some form of direction in the debate. What you should know is that this is an Asian parliamentary debate, which means there are 3 people in a team, 3 versus 3, government versus opposition. This might be a bit repetitive for those who already know what debating is or like the basics of high school debating, but I'm pretty sure there are certain nuances that you might want to learn so that you don't do these mistakes during your school tournament. So, what is debating? There's a lot of different definitions to debating. And here as well is just the way you want to decide, like, even for food, like, we put a nasi kerabu, but, like, technically, the concept could be nasi kerabu versus anything like nasi kandar. Have you all had nasi kandar before? Anyone here? Yep. Okay. So, I love nasi kandar. I'm always going to choose nasi kandar. But when I'm in Kelantan or Terengganu, I'm going to let go of nasi kandar and have nasi kerabu. And the reason why I can make that decision is because I had a debate in my mind. What is better? But the point here is, I think most schools or debaters would see debating as a hero versus villain story arc for themselves. I think that's a wrong concept. If you love superheroes, I think the best example to explain what debating is like Captain America Civil War. You have both Captain America and Iron Man. You can side either side and you're still a hero because both sides technically want to give a solution. The question of debate isn't whether it's solution versus problem. Technically, it's problem. There's a problem in the motion in itself. Both sides are supposed to discuss and argue which solution is better. Sometimes maybe it's not upon which 2 solutions. Sometimes the bigger question could just be, is the solution something favorable in this circumstance? And I think what you want to see debating beyond just the argumentation is it's a formal and meaningful process of discussion to find the best conclusion or solution to the issue. Now, so generally I've explained this as well, but here are things that you should know, right? Debating is not just randomly arguing, and I tell this to multiple people. If you are good at like maybe TikTok comments and like Twitter battles or whatsoever, you are not a debater. You're a keyboard warrior, and I guess that's a whole different competition there. And number 2, even if you are a debater and you do learn very well out of all the workshops, please don't use this at home. Arguing against your parents, your friends, do not make you a better debater. I think the best debaters know when to argue, when to speak up, but they also know when it's just like nah, we don't want to just randomly argue. Third, debating shouldn't be a screaming contest, which means when you even go for tournaments in the future, whether if it's virtual or if it's physical, you obviously you need to have some level of intonation and your vocal range and etc. But it should not be a place where you just start shouting at each other, and you should never go into a debate room with the intention to make your opponents cry. I think that's just big bullying, and that's not in the in like that's not in the interest of debating. Debating is to ensure that at the end of the debate, you guys are friends, you are pleased with each other's speeches. It could get heated because people do get heated in times of disagreement. By the end, you respect one another because you're both trying to save the communities that you're debating for. And I think that's something I want to point out and highlight. This should also be applied in like every bit of your life, even in this training session. Now, what you should know are 3 levels here. A proper debate cannot exist if you don't accept what the other side is saying. Because I think a lot of debaters would say things like this in a speech, like, side government is delusional, side opposition, this doesn't make sense, and we just don't want to argue with whatever they say. I think then it doesn't become a debate. It just tends to become public speaking, where it exists in a bubble, where it's just you yourself, and this it's no longer an engaging discussion. So you need to accept whatever they say. And the way you do this is just by trying to figure out what is it or why are they saying this? What is in the best interest? Like, what's their best case, right? Don't always just jump the gun and assume people at their worst. I think it's best to assume them at their best. And like I think the slide already says, if you don't accept this, then it just becomes a verbal brawl. Like you're just fighting each other. So understand that debating at its core is just good versus good, but the way we decide a winner is who is better among the good. and then of course that becomes the best. So let's talk about the concepts here. So there are two teams competing, government versus opposition. It will be 3 versus 3. Government, or also known as proposition at times, would always support the topic regardless. Even if maybe personally you don't like certain things or certain values. So let's just say the motion reads, this house believes that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is failing. Okay. Um, or okay, maybe I would want to argue something a bit more. Maybe we could argue that this house believes that the MCU is better than the DCU. So I'm not a big fan of the MCU. I'm a big DC fan. I'm just gonna give a very shameless plug of to watch Superman, which releases this July. But even if I'm against Marvel, I mean, I'm like personally, but I'm placed inside of government, I still need to think in the shoes of a Marvel supporter. And you're in opposition, you always go against topic regardless. Note, every speech is 8 minutes except reply speeches. What are reply speeches? I'll explain to you how it looks like in the format in a bit. But we have a session on reply speeches that will be around next week. So I'll ask you guys to tune in for that session to understand the structure and the flows of reply speeches to ace them. How does that structure then look like? So here's how the debate usually goes. It always starts with a government first speaker, and in Asian parliamentary, it ends with a government speaker as well, because the debate will start with the prime minister. Once the prime minister is done after 8 minutes, the chair, who's also the judge or the chairperson in the room, will invite the leader of opposition, the first speaker of opposition, and then it goes to the deputy prime minister, deputy leader of opposition, government whip, opposition whip. But here's where the flip happens. After opposition whip, you go to opposition reply first, and only then government reply. Point to highlight. The names are government and opposition, but in no instance are you really representing any world's government or opposition. These are just merely names that are put into debating. You are not suddenly going to be the prime minister of certain countries, or like opposing certain governments in that case as well. So I think I also want to just note that I think it's a good reminder to understand that sometimes it's not that deep. So please don't like get too like bothered with debates. I think someone's mic is on. Let me just check very quickly. All right, thanks, guys. All right, so as I was saying, oh, sorry, this previous slide. Okay, what I would highly suggest you guys to do when debating is to create a tracking sheet, which means that whenever you are trying to even listen to a debate or you're watching a debate, write down their speeches and write it down according to each speaker. So I think really good debaters would be able to point out like in which speaker said what and why are they disagreeing with this thing, rather than just trying to say like they said randomly this or they said randomly that. I think if you're able to point out why each speaker, maybe what they mentioned could have been harmful to that case in specific areas, that would show judges why you are someone who's tentative, someone who's really listening and really part of the debate. But you should also know, although debating is a sport where you speak a lot, the biggest skill that you need in debate is listening. Because let's just do the maths here. You have 6 speakers who will be speaking for 8 minutes. That's a good 48 minutes. And if you add the 2 other reply speeches in, it's 56 minutes. A debate can go up to just 1 hour as a whole. But out of 1 hour, if you think about it, you spend only 8 minutes giving a speech. In the best case situation, you spend like 12 minutes, including reply. 12 minutes out of 60 minutes. And that's like 1/5 of the entire debate. Hence why my suggestion is listen more. And whenever you listen, don't just listen, write it down so that you remember. And this is a great flow of how you can even present it on your book. So I think different people have different ways of tracking, right? Some use A4 papers. Also, guys, no devices. So no laptops and iPads. But yeah, some use books, some use papers, um, some use like cards instead. I think how you want to do it is ensure that you have who's in what speaker and what they're saying. This helps you in debate, but also if someday you want to become a judge, it will help you with tracking and trying to just understand the flow of debates and how debates are won and how debates are lost. Now, let's go to speaker roles. So essentially, the first first speakers of government opposition is the same. But before I go further into this, clarifying all of this, does anyone have any questions for the previous part, like structure here? I'm gonna give it 5 seconds.
No.
Nope. Okay. No questions. Wait, I don't know why I see something in the chat, but I don't know what it is. Oh, okay. No. Oh wait, is this a main chat? I'm so bad with Zoom at times. Okay, very clear, clear. All right, thanks. Thanks Jessica and Mary. Okay, cool. Let's go next. First speaker roles have differed or like transformed over time. Initially, there was a lot of um structure that's prioritized with this method in itself, but today I think the PM role has become very flexible on its own. What do I mean by this? First is what is set up. So initially, when I was back in school debating, it used to just be defining what the motion meant, and of course, definitions are still critical in debates, but it's become a bit more advanced. So of course, like how technology has developed over time, debate has also developed, and this is what the development looks like. Definitions have now become more of characterization and contextualization. Okay, if it's tough to pronounce, the simple way is just to say characterize. What is characterization? Essentially, it is to give character or a better meaning to the word beyond what dictionaries and Google is telling you. So, certain words, obviously, you would have to use the dictionary if you're not very sure with language, and that's okay. When I first started debating, my level of English was also very poor, and I would have a dictionary wherever I went to, like whichever competition I went to, and whenever I heard terms which I just didn't understand or just never heard of, I would use the dictionary for reference. But if you are someone who already knows the basics or the core understanding of what the word is, you want to explain it in the most layman or normal person term. What does this then translate to? Assuming the motion is let's just say this house would um this house as Malaysia would sever ties with the United States of America. You can go to back to Google and search up like what is the definition of Malaysia. You could also search up like the definition of what is severe ties, and all of these things. But here's where it becomes a bit problematic, especially when definitions just don't fit in that specific context of the debate. So what I would suggest you, and what is also in trend with today's generation of debating, is that you explain in your own terms. What is Malaysia? Malaysia is a developing country that exists in Southeast Asia. There are like many races. It's a very diverse country where people live in harmony. And it's rich with natural resources. It's rich with great food. I think any state you go to in Malaysia has great food. But the point is, you can just explain it in the way you want. Imagine that you're trying to tell someone who really doesn't know anything about this, so you want to explain to them the way that they can understand. But here's what I'm going to try. Let's just all go to Google for a bit. Let's just Google, or I mean, if you're more familiar with ChatGPT, you can try Chat. But I think ChatGPT has just recently crashed. That's what I heard. At this point, I think we are all waiting for ChatGPT to come back to life. But let's just ask Google. Google define Malaysia. So the way Google defines Malaysia is a country in Southeast Asia, specifically a federal constitutional monarchy. It's comprised of two regions, Peninsular Malaysia on the Malay Peninsula and East Malaysia (Sabah Sarawak) on the island of Borneo. Malaysia is known for its diverse culture, rich history, and vibrant economy. If you say this in a debate, you sound very robotic. That's the first problem. Number two, when you randomly throw words like federal constitutional monarchy, whether or not if it's judges or even debaters, I assure you, not many people will somewhat jump and understand what this literally means. And even if it's monarchy, I think just pointing out, like, of course we do have our kings and our king and our queen, but Malaysia essentially is a democratic country where we vote for our leaders who runs the country. So when you follow definitions, you see there's a bit of a twist, and it
Okay,
makes the
can you
whole
accept my condition?
sorry. Uh, okay, I think someone accidentally muted. It's fine. Um, So it makes the whole concept here a bit more messy, and people are now just unclear, which is why don't depend on devices or just what the fixed definition is. My suggestion will be you have lived on this world long enough. If you know something, explain it on your own. If you don't, read it up, but still think what is the best way to explain this to an average, reasonable person. Second, set a team stance. And I think, yes, maybe sometimes it's so evidently clear what government teams ought to do and what opposition ought to do, right? But this telling judges or making it clear in the debate speech itself on what are you trying to achieve or what is the position that you are taking in a debate makes the debate so much clearer. And I think even a lot of top teams forget to do this, which makes debates become very messy. And when debates become messy, you make judges question what are these teams trying to prove and what is this conclusion that I'm waiting for or the solution that I'm expecting at the end of the debate. Wagon motions get quite messy. So let's just say uh, this house opposes the banning of vape. Now, because the motion says this house opposes, if a government team just says, we support the motion, and the government team just suddenly goes like, um, we support this like what vape is, but they don't make it clear what exactly they are supporting. Is it, do they support banning of vapes or do they support opposing the banning of vapes? Which is why you must you don't need to explain the stance. Just ensuring that you do mention the stance is critical. And a simple way would just be like, we from side government strongly support the motion in which we support in anyone who wishes to oppose against the banning of vape. So that means to say we are a side that will and we want vapes to exist. We don't want it to be banned. So ensuring this is clear makes judges and also your opponents be also like feel clarity, and when there's clarity, you have a smoother way of debating. Third, and also very important, like guys, I think I say very, very important stuff like for the entire setup because I think people tend to neglect setup a lot more these days. Burden of proof. Burden of proof is technically you setting your objective to achieve. In any motion, you can save a lot of different people, you can solve a lot of different problems. But strategic debaters pick and choose which problems they can actually solve in in the flow of the debate. So, if I were to give you a longer and lengthier motion, a motion like this house as Malaysia would prioritize economic development over and over environmental protection, maybe, right? So many problems can be discussed. You can discuss climate change, you can discuss the economy, you can discuss governance, you can discuss the position of Malaysia as the leaders of ASEAN this year. There are so many things. If you try solving all of it in 8 minutes, I guarantee you it will not be enough to prove how you do solve everything. My suggestion is pick and choose your battles and what's most important, what is most feasible, or what's something that you can actually solve. And then tell judges that, like, maybe you can, I would say maybe 1 to 2 burden of proofs is usually already sufficient. So telling judges, judge or chair, in government, our burden of proof is quite simple. Insofar we are able to prove to you that Malaysia will be able to sustain better in the long term, especially in economy, we win this debate. Why do we prioritize the economy? It's because the economy is what ensures people are living good quality lifestyles and what also ensures for the country to continue running in order to expand into other areas. Which is why if government can prove to you why we are able to better benefit the economy, we take the debate. Just explaining that alone helps your entire team so much more because then that becomes the magnet or the core value of what your team has to support, which keeps your team consistent and like certain throughout the debate. In Asian parliamentary, because it's always 3 versus 3, there is always the case of inconsistencies and then there's contradictions because teams just get confused. What exactly am I trying to solve at the end of the day? Or how do I solve all three of it? And when you keep jumping and jumping and jumping, sometimes you can become a lalang. And I'm quite sure as Malaysian people, we don't like lalangs. Of course, lalang is not healthy for our fields, right? So don't be a lalang, right? Ensure you're not a lalang by ensuring you have a burden of proof and your whole team is consistent in trying to prove that outcome. Now, that settles the setup. How long should setup take in a first speaker speech? I would suggest good setups last only up for 2 minutes and 3 minutes in the worst case or maximum. Please don't go up to 4 or 5 minutes to just explain the setup. Honestly speaking, I think this first part of setup can be cleared within the first minute or the second minute at most, because you would need time to go to part 2. Part 2 is mechanism and policy. So, as I've mentioned earlier, debate has developed over time, right, guys? What then has also developed? Today, debate is so much more about strategy. To a point that it's quite easy to figure out what is the government and the opposition case. But what is difficult, or what we expect debaters to have, is how do you think on the solution? So it's not easy. I mean, you will have a solution, but what action are you taking to ensure that the solution does happen? Different motions will have different types of mechanism and policy, which I will explain at the end of this specific session. So hold on to that thought, but just be clear that you will need to create some form of action or process to also tell judges how exactly will your solution come to place and how will it work. This part here will also likely take 1 to 2 minutes. I think really good first speaker speeches. You can see, I will want to name drop a few. There is a debater from University Malaya by the name of Muhyiddin Hasan. Amazing first speaker. You can watch his videos on YouTube as well, and you'll see how clearly he always set up the debate and the mechanisms before he jumps to arguments, which makes judges also credit, like, wow, he doesn't just have a solution, but he also has a way to reach that area. And that's something that I would highly suggest you guys to also take note of. Now, back in the day when I first started debating, it used to just be first speaker, one argument. And that's because a lot of first speakers take a lot of time in like the setup mechanism, and they only have one time for one argument. I think now the way I'm not I think I sorry I would suggest that now you try creating two arguments per speaker in first speaker. And these two arguments in itself should be, number one, the most important thing the team wants to defend, or moment in the discussion your team's like, oh man, that's like the most like that argument is going to win us this debate, or that argument or that stakeholder is what we need to protect the most. Ensure your first speaker raises it, because the tip here is that you want to win the debate from the first speaker from the get-go. And if that is the opening of the discussion, no matter what opposition tries to respond to or whatsoever, your argument is still there, and everyone else after you can also defend the argument. So always bring up the most important claims in the first. Second, you want to also bring an extra argument to also ensure the debate isn't too narrow and is just not in-depth enough. Because motions can go deeper, and you want to try ensuring that even if like the first target is done, you're able to save other bits and pieces of debate. Of course, not everything else. So plan and decide what is the next most important thing. What other things maybe can you still consider on saving under the same umbrella of whatever you mentioned earlier. So try presenting two arguments. Some first speakers go up to three. There is no specific number of arguments you can or cannot give, but my suggestion is to keep it at two. Two would mean you have good argumentation, but also good analysis and elaboration within. I think presenting too many arguments just makes you aimless machine gun trying to shoot everything everywhere, but your arguments become very weak because they're underdeveloped. I think in this generation, if I may say, you are supposed to be cooking when you're giving a speech. So imagine you're a chef trying to cook everything and it's all undercooked. So at this point, you're just eating raw food. So don't do it. I think having the main dish and just one side dish is good enough in the first speaker. Okay. I'm gonna pause here to open up any questions, like open up the floor for any questions. Are there any questions from the crowd?
Regarding the definitions, right?
Mm.
Can we like still, how to say, like reject the definitions given sometimes?
Oh, that's a great question. You can reject the definition. So there are instances where your opponents might give you very weird definitions. Um, okay, I'm just gonna test the crowd here. Okay, guys, if you have seen the Marvel Cinematic Universe or the superheroes, you might have heard of this guy named Iron Man. Please type in the chat or verbally explain to me what is how would you define Iron Man? Geraldine, since you asked that question, have you seen Iron Man before?
Yes.
Okay, would you want to try defining what Iron Man is?
Mm. I would say he's one of the superheroes who would put everyone first instead of himself first.
Okay, he's a hero who puts everyone before himself, right? Okay, what about the rest of you guys? I'm going to give you a quick 30 seconds to just type in the chat. What is Iron Man to you? Jacob says bionic.
For me, Iron Man is a rich businessman who is also a genius and wants to save the world.
Okay, rich genius businessman who wants to save the world. Okay, anyone else want to give it a try? Okay, what have two roles at the same time? Who has two roles at the same time? Yushwen. Like a debater. Oh, okay. Um, maybe okay, but I'm gonna say something that's gonna be very controversial to Marvel fans. If and okay, this is not my definition. I'm just telling you what a bad definition is, by the way. Um, and also this clarification. I don't hate the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I've grown to like it, but I still think DC is just better than Marvel because I've been reading comics since I was young. Okay, but the point is, um, if your opponent says Iron Man is the guy from the Adobe, he takes your clothes out of the laundry, and he's a hero who just irons the clothes. And he's or maybe that's one definition. Another definition could be he's this random superhero who wears a sardine can as a suit, and this has heart problems initially, but then he fixes heart problems, and then he ends up still somewhat dying at the end of Avengers. Quite sad. These are still two definitions, and obviously it makes the debate go nowhere, especially if the debate is just saying, like, maybe imagine the motions like this house as Iron Man would not snap his finger at the end of Avengers Endgame, right? And the debate is just like, oh, this guy is from the Dobby, he irons clothes, and he wears sardine cans as a suit. That's a horrible definition. So leader of oppositions have the duty to respond and to give a definitional challenge. So instead of um like agreeing with the characterization, Geraldine, LO would likely be judges. That characterization and definition is wrong. We want to challenge it, and then you explain it. Um, After LO explains, second speakers can re-challenge the LO. So let's say PM gives a bad definition, LO gives another definition, but the definition is even worse than what PM gave. Then DPM should be the one who sets the tone, and the last person who can really debate the definition is second speakers. At the point of a third speaker, and you are still debating the definition, that shows a very poor and unhealthy debate. So what do I suggest? First PM and then LO. At that point, you leave it to judges to kind of figure out what makes most sense. But usually, in most instances, it's what LO says that make most sense, because otherwise LO wouldn't want to challenge it, right? But assuming the debate becomes very messy and you're like both still have their two definitions and nobody wants to accept the other, you play by the even if, which means that in every argument, in every rebuttal and response that you give to the opponents, play it by your definition and by their definition. Show judges why on both instances that is the argument works or the response works. Do we need a second argument as first speaker, or do we do it as a second speaker? Good question, William. So as I mentioned earlier, first speakers should be giving two arguments in this generation at this point. Give two, try developing them. Even so, I would say prioritize the first, because at least you want one good argument out. But a good strategy now is to give two. By the books or the rules, there is no fixed number of arguments you should give. So you might don't be surprised if you meet debaters who give you 3 or 4 or 5 arguments in the first speaker, right? But if they give 4 or 5 arguments, usually you can expect that it's going to be undercooked and under-analyzed. When arguments are less analyzed, it's easier to respond to them. So I think these are things that you could also have Like, just keep an eye out and be aware of. Okay, is everyone clear so far? Cool? Okay, great. Let's go. Next slide. So here is where Iron Man comes to the picture. Um, Second speaker. So this role is very flexible. There is no fixed way of doing a deputy speaker speech. Deputy speakers need to be extremely strategic. Because to be very honest, I'm a second speaker myself. And the big question I ask myself before every speech is, in this debate, and when I say this debate, I'm not talking about just the motion, because debate is usually highly dependent on one's ability to adapt in the round. Different rounds, different rooms will have different circumstances, right? So just like Dr. Strange, who's aware of all the millions of outcomes that's possible, you might also just be prepared that you might have to shift. So the big question I have to myself is always, do I need to support my first speaker more in this round, or do I need to support my third speaker more? If I need to defend my first speaker more, I will likely spend a lot more time in the extension, trying to re-explain, further analyze and elaborate what my first speaker said. But some debates will require me to support my third speaker more, and maybe that's because the opposition team has so many good arguments, and I just don't think there'll be enough time for my third speaker to respond and break every single thing down. So maybe what I will do is I will spend more time on the rebuttals part to break as much as I can, so that it allows my third speaker some more room to respond to the bigger and heavier things later. So you have to be able to shift. There is no one size fits all structure for a second speaker. So the first thing that you do in any speech from here onwards is you have to have a rebuttal and response. Do remember, whenever you write a script, like a scripted speech or use ChatGPT, your rebuttals usually become automatically weaker because people either forget this or they don't just think on how to ensure that rebuttals are coherent with the arguments. So make sure you do think of your rebuttals, but I would also then further suggest, don't think of them in a bubble or in a vacuum. Understand that your responses and rebuttals also play a role in debate, and they should also be part of the flow of what the arguments are. So find a way, whenever you do rebut, you find a way to bring it back to the debate and the motion at hand. Similarly, after rebuttals, you're doing extensions. What are extensions? Is just trying to analyze the first case. You can think of multiple ways of the first speaker to re-explain it, but show some consistency and coherency. Explain what your first speaker has mentioned, and then explain how you're adding to that rather than directly replacing it. I think a lot of speakers tend to want to replace, and when you replace is when the contradictions happen or the inconsistencies in the theme, and that's what kind of makes your points go lower. Third, argument on its own. Have your own unique argument. I would say find different ways to expand the debate. Different I guess trying to diversify the look of what a debate can do. Sometimes it's these unique things that will likely win you the debate, because when all basic things are done, is that unique argument that will likely show you just like, wow, what is this argument? Like, and that's when you really cook. So go on, be creative, be unique, and have that additional dimension that will assist you. The last thing you should want to do as a second speaker, especially in DLO, because I mean you can do it in DPM as well, because at this point you already know what the basic argumentation are from both teams. You want to compare to judges what is the best case of both sides, right? If both teams were to able to succeed in the ways explained, why is um my team's solution still better? Second, judge, if both teams were to fail because the world is so uncertain and volatile, why is our worst case still a better world to live in compared to their entire horrific world? And lastly, I think very good debaters, like I've seen the best second speakers like in the world do this, when they're able to prove why their own team's worst case is still a lot more favorable than their team's best case. Which means, yeah, maybe you have your solution and it works, but even if we fail, we're still better than you. I think that's when you really can like push and solidify your cases. So that's generally it for second speakers. But remember, the point to note here is to be flexible, to be adaptable, and to be versatile at every point of this junction.